the Psych in Business podcast, where we highlight the integration of psychology and psychological principles into the world of business and organizations. I'm your host, Dr. Ernest Wayde. I'm very excited to introduce you today, my guest. He's a well-known coach, advisor, and author. He's one of the strongest advocates for the need for psychological knowledge and training for coaches. He is Dr. John Reed. John is a top-level executive coach, a trusted advisor to senior leaders, and the leading advocate for the more substantial standards and competencies for practicing coaches to professionalize discipline. He is a MG100 Coaches member, helping talented people excel further. He specializes in serving C-level leaders, founders, partners, boards, teams, and other senior professionals. 3 organizations, including Marshall Goldsmith Stakeholder Centered Coaching and the ICF, designate him as a master coach. John integrates expertise in leadership, strategy, psychology, and coaching. He received an MBA from the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth College and a PhD in psychology from the University of Georgia with an internship at Emory. He serves as a licensed business psychologist. John is a U.S. Navy veteran and previously worked in the Accenture strategy practice. In 2005, John began his coaching practice, Quinn Reed Associates, to help leaders reach new heights. John is a founding fellow and contributing author to the Institute of Coaching at McLean Harvard Medical School. His latest book, released in 2022, is Pinpointing Excellence: Succeed with Great Executive Coaching and Steer Clear of the Rest. His latest recognition is the Distinguished Psychologist in Leadership Award, received in 2023 from the Society of Psychologists in Leadership. His 50-plus client organizations range from the Fortune 100 to private equity startups in 18 sectors, including, for instance, aerospace, consumer products, environmental services, energy, financial services, healthcare, legal, manufacturing, and technology. In volunteering, John mentors developing coaches in the Forefront program associated with the MG100 Coaches. He cares about education and support for children and veterans. He has a history of board service, including service as the president of an inner-city Houston school, the Nehemiah Center, the Honor Foundation, the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth, Dartmouth College, and Deerfield Academy are additional organizations he supports. Wow. Dr. John Reed, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ernest. It's an honor to be here and to be here with a fellow member of the Society of Psychologists in Leadership and a leader in his own right in our field.
Well, thank you, John.
So it's a pleasure, Ernest.
Thank you so much. I was there to see you get your award, and looking at all your accomplishments, very well deserved, John.
Thank you. That's very kind of you, Ernest.
Now, as a veteran, John, I have to say thank you for your service as well. We really appreciate your sacrifice.
Well, I actually have my father, who will be 97 next month, is a Navy veteran, and I have a daughter who went to Annapolis and was a helicopter pilot, and I have a son who just finished 5 years in the Marines.
Wow.
So he's now let me see if I have this right. He's starting his sophomore year in college, and he just turned 25.
Wow.
So he's he's a good guy.
That's amazing.
Good guy.
Family of service. Thank you. Thank you multiple times over, John. That's amazing.
Well, that's very kind of you. And there are a lot of people who served sort of at the tip of the spear. Mm-hmm. I was in a administrative office in the United States. So I was in the Navy, but I was far from the flashpoint of action. But
still,
you don't get to pick what you do.
Still a sacrifice. But John, that's a good segue. I want to ask you about your career, and there's so much stuff in here that I don't know that we're going to get through all of it, but I really want to start with your journey. How did you get into being a business psychologist? Because I know you started off first in business and then added the psychology, which is a unique approach. So tell us about that, John.
Sure. Well, I finished business school and decided to go into management consulting, and was lucky and had, I would say, a good 11 years of doing that. And then right about that time, I began to, as some people do, uh, not not be as satisfied with it as I used to be. And I was getting promotions, and I was actually confused because some people would look at me and think, well, this things seem to be clicking along pretty well for this guy. Um, and I went to a psychologist who was a sort of a career counselor
Mm-hmm.
because I couldn't quite figure out why I was sort of a quote achieving more and enjoying it less. And this guy said to me, I am very much devoted to him and indebted to him because he said to me one day, look, I'd like you to go home and read about adult stages of development. And of course, at that point, I had no psychological training. So I said,
Mm-hmm.
adult stages of development, what the hell is that? You know, and he said, I'd like you to particularly read about Eric Erickson. And in particular, I'd like you to read about the adult stage of development called generativity. I thought, this is ridiculous. Why am I doing this? Went home, did that. Generativity, as you know, Ernest, is that stage where, among other things, people begin to get much more interested in
Mm-hmm.
serving other
Mm-hmm.
people than anything else. And he said, my guess is that you are reaching that stage. And I was confused because I thought, gee, I want him to help me reframe what's going on in my current business role so I can just chug along with it.
Mm-hmm.
But he was smart enough to see that there was a bigger transition going on. So with his help, I then looked at several different careers. I looked at becoming a physician, a minister, and third thing I looked at was becoming a psychologist.
Wow, those are big
And
career
so
changes.
all big career change, so leaving a big job, a six-figure job to go back to graduate school was terrifying in some ways, but I, you know, looking back at it now, I was very lucky to have that encouragement from him because now, 30 some odd years later, I am very, very happy in my work. I have several friends who are classmates from business school days who are uh, watching the second hand on their watch to get to the point when they don't have to do their job anymore and can just retire. Whereas I don't really ever want to retire. I love what I do, and uh, but I would never have found this channel if it weren't for Dr. Stathis. His name was John
Mm-hmm.
Stathis, um, and actually finished. I went to the University of Georgia to get my PhD and had a fourth year internship at
Mm-hmm.
Emory, and then actually got hired back into consulting after graduating. Um, and they had me in strategy consulting at Accenture. Now it used to be called Anderson
Mm-hmm.
Consulting, now Accenture. But I was also, as a new psychologist, a dotted line into change
Mm-hmm.
management, another function
Mm-hmm.
within it. And it was in change management that I first started to encounter executives, this would be in the late 90s, who were in need or interested in counseling. There are lots of different words that were used. Um, Coaching actually wasn't used as a term very often.
Interesting.
That's where I first began to encounter those people. I never really intended to become a coach. I wanted to be just your garden variety organizational psychologist and strategy
Mm-hmm.
consultant. So um, I began to enjoy that aspect of work more than anything else. So ultimately, in 2005, I opened my own practice. and that's what I've been doing ever since.
That is such an
So,
amazing story, John. It's so interesting to me that you were doing what most people would perceive to be well, right, in your work, and this psychologist was able to help you see that there was something else that would be more fulfilling to you, and here you are from it. So that's a really fantastic story. So
well, it's again very very lucky to have great support, Ernest, and insight from a lot of very talented
mhm,
people around me, and encouragement from family and
mhm.
friends also. But lucky to have made that transition.
Absolutely. And I see some parallels from going to a psychologist who helped give you some coaching and some support to the work that you do now as a business psychologist who gives other leaders, that coaching and support. Help us understand firstly, why is coaching important for leaders? Why should that even be something that should be considered?
Well, it can make, if you want to look at it as sort of an ROI
Hmm.
proposition, if you're working particularly with senior executives who are making decisions and leading organizations of a considerable size, if you can help them be, let's just say, 10% more effective in their
Hmm.
work
Hmm.
than they were before, um, or if they're already highly proficient, if you can help them become that much more
Hmm.
proficient, the the benefit to people, all kinds of stakeholders, employees, colleagues, stockholders, you name it, can be
Hmm.
enormous, can be very significant. So you can help society more broadly because of the impact of that. You can help people develop in their careers and have even more impact. And the business environment, as you know, is accelerating continually and gets more and more challenging for leaders every year.
Yep.
So, and I think psychologists, as you know, Ernest, psychologists are very, very well positioned to understand a whole range of topics that are directly
Hmm.
impacting leaders. Behavior change, stress management, psychological assessment, adult
Yep.
development, work family balance, career transitioning. Uh, the list is
Yep.
enormous. And so um, I will say, however, that most people in the senior executive ranks that I see first kind of reach out to me more because of my MBA probably than anything
Hmm.
else. So that's sort of a door opener in some ways. But once the door opens and you have some credibility, then you can start to apply a lot of the psychological depth that you might
Hmm.
have. And I'm sure you do that in your work.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Yeah, I think that's
yeah,
one of the benefits of having both the business and the psychology background is you and I both have is that we're, yeah, at least from my point of view, I'm able to understand what the priorities are for the business leader, right? I mean, that's they come to you for their priorities, and if you just start talking about psychological aspects without linking it to their priorities, you're not going to get very far, right? And so I really
that's
appreciate
exactly right.
that you have both of that background and are able to make that connection. Well, you said when you came back after you got your psychological degree, you were hired back as a consultant. Can you talk a little bit about how your perspective had changed as a result of that training at all?
Oh, sure, sure. My first stint right out of business
Hmm.
school for 11 years or so, I was your sort of classically trained MBA. I was very goal oriented. I cared about
Hmm.
people and I think I related to people well, but I really was very interested in business goals. Um, and for most of that 11 years, Ernest, I saw the people around me and myself as instruments for getting from point A to point
Hmm.
B, right? It was all about hitting the mark, whatever that
Hmm.
was, a revenue number, a profit number, a market share number,
Yeah.
whatever. It was only, I would say, in the last 5 years of working, going back to the sort of adult stage of development generativity, that I began to get, I realized that some of the most satisfying things about my job for me really were becoming less and less about hitting the target,
Hmm.
and more were the moments when I could be working with some of the people reporting to
Hmm.
me to help them be better at what they were
Hmm.
doing, better and more satisfied in the service of their own goals and their own work, which should have been a signal to me that something was shifting.
Hmm.
It wasn't immediately a signal, but I hope I'm describing that reasonably well for
Yeah,
you.
yeah. It
But
sounds like,
but it
the training that you got helped you to be a better leader to the people around you. Even, not even talking about the consulting, but just the psychological training helped you understand better what it meant to be a good leader there.
right. And then after a PhD, going back to an environment where I had some people reporting to me, I had clients before. I was in a slightly different aspect of strategy
Hmm.
consulting and change management. But what was extremely helpful at that point was a much better tuned awareness of the dynamics, the stresses, the
Hmm.
satisfactions, the motivators of the person sitting in front of
Hmm.
me. So it wasn't just me trying to achieve goals for the business that I was part
Hmm.
of, and being a good person and working with the client nicely. The clients now were people who were experiencing not only business challenges, but interpersonal,
Yeah.
in some cases, psychological
Hmm.
demands to get to a point where they could achieve those business outcomes. So it was nice, as you said it so well, to have very good grounding in both sides of that, both in the sort of the business side,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
marketing strategy, so on and so forth side, and on the psychological side, the the leadership development aspects.
Yeah, John. I mean, you say it so well. I think this is one of the things that I think is the value that we can bring to the field of business is understanding that a business is an organization made up of people, right? And people are individual. People have psychological concerns. How you come into work one day, whether you're happy or sad, will impact the decision that you make, may impact the behavior that you choose to engage in, and will impact people around you, including your coworkers, your clients, your competitors. And so bringing that understanding, that layer of clarity to the situation, I think is really just is the gold. I think that people who have psychological training can provide. So.
I think it's and finding organizations like the Society of Psychologists of
Mhm.
Leadership or the Division 13 of the American Psychological Association. I know all those communities that you're part of is a
Mhm.
godsend, because those are communities of people who in most cases understand both sides of the
Yeah.
coin very
Yeah,
well.
absolutely.
So
I couldn't agree more. Now, John, I know you are a guru when it comes to executive coaching. Can you give us any examples of situations that you've walked into where you've provided coaching to help leaders or businesses, really see the value of understanding and appreciating that psychological aspect of things?
sure, I've been lucky. I guess it's maybe been about 25 years now, Ernest, but a great many leaders who are, let me give you an example. The head of one of the larger law
Hmm.
firms globally is a client, um, and he has, in this case, it's a man. He has a leadership team of three other
Hmm.
people. So there's a sort of a four-person leadership
Hmm.
team of this global law firm. And I've started working with him before he took the role of being the
Mhm.
chair,
Mhm.
the overall head of the law firm. He was one of their senior partners, but he had a tremendous amount of responsibility for his clients, right?
Mhm.
His external
Yeah.
clients. And he was then going to be moving to a situation where a lot of his work was in managing, internally managing this enormous
Mhm.
organization to keep it moving in this very positive direction. And it was a commitment he was making to about a decade in this new role as a chair.
Mhm.
He's an extraordinary guy, but as you can imagine, that's quite a dramatic shift because he was used to being measured in the classic revenue
Billable hours.
generation,
Yeah.
billable hours, which he was very comfortable and proficient
Mhm.
in, but he also had a lot of respect and credibility within the firm as an informal
Mhm.
leader or a leader of some of the practice areas. But this called for him to really to step back and devote the bulk of his time not to necessarily client
Mhm.
billables, but to all kinds of additional the strategy of the firm, the organization of the firm, the human
Yeah.
capital management and development of the firm. I mean, it's a gigantic multi-billion-dollar
Mhm.
business. So it has been a privilege to work with him to help him capitalize on a lot of skills and capabilities and emotional
Mhm.
intelligence
Mhm.
that he very much has, and at the same time to help him shift the way he frames things and looks at things because the actual demands on him have shifted,
Mhm.
right? So if you're used to turning the crank in a particular
Yeah.
way and you've had 20 some odd years of being immensely effective at that,
Mhm.
and you have some of that to do, but you have a whole range of additional things to do. Sometimes it helps to have a sounding board and to have yourself assessed in a variety of
Mhm.
ways so that you can begin to make the
Yeah.
transition to tackle those other things very well, and also to continue to get feedback from all your stakeholders about how you're doing, right?
Mhm.
So for that sort of continuous improvement, uh, that's an example of a great experience where I think, frankly, I learn more from many of my clients than they do from me. That's one of the other nice things that's so stimulating about
And
this
that is such a great
this kind of
example,
work.
I think, because you really talk about touching on a number of things that I could pull on. I think one of the things that really interests me is just the shifting of roles and responsibility, right? Very often, leaders are excellent at whatever technical or service or clinical skill that they have. And then when they're asked to step into leadership role, especially of such a large organization, it requires a whole new set of skills, which might
Yeah,
not have been well developed or trained in. So, I think this is
yeah.
where a coach can really be very helpful to helping you see that, understand that, and make the adjustment. So I really feel like that's such a great example. But also pulls me to the next thing I really want to talk about is your book. I really want to hear about your book, Pinpointing Excellence, because I know that you are an advocate not just for coaching, but for good, great coaching, right? So tell us a little bit about your book and the work that you've been doing advocating for that.
Well, thank you, Ernest. Well, uh, and I'll try and give you the Reader's Digest version so your listeners don't go to sleep here. But I basically when I decided to spend most of my time, this would have been around 2005, in coaching and less time in strategy
Hmm.
consulting, it became apparent to me that, well, let me put it this way. I assumed that everybody who was going into coaching or working in coaching had a background somewhat like mine, that they had a strong a strong psychology base and a strong business base, and so on and so forth. Truly, what I found is that the vast majority of people who were in
Mm-hmm.
coaching, the tactful way to put it is, in some cases, had no relevant training because there were no entry
Mm-hmm.
requirements, or in some cases, they had partial
Mm-hmm.
training. For example, they might have known something about business, but nothing about behavior change or helping people transition
Mm-hmm.
and understand themselves better, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Uh, and in some cases, they had absolutely no training in
Mm-hmm.
coaching either. So anyway, so I came out with a book about 10 years ago, the first book that sort of laid out 4 competency areas that were important if you were looking at someone who claimed to be an executive
Mm-hmm.
coach. One was, of course,
Yeah.
business. One was psychology. One was
Mm-hmm.
coaching. And the last was ethics.
Yeah.
Just those 4 things. And then last year, I came out with an expanded update for the 2020s of that book, which went into a lot more detail about how coaching in some ways had
Mm-hmm.
improved in the last 10 years and in some ways had actually regressed because it had become, with social
Mm-hmm.
media and Zoom and everything else, it had become even easier if you happen to be a nice person and could make a nice first impression.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with that as long as there's some substance underneath
Mm-hmm.
that. But lots of people can make a nice sort of digital impression and actually not have much to deliver after that. And so for the consumer of coaching, in some ways it's even more dangerous now than it was 10 years ago. So I feel like the book or the books are there to help at least 2 sets of people. One is buyers of coaching
Mm-hmm.
services
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that they vet someone who says that they're an executive coach as thoroughly as
Mm-hmm.
possible based on pretty objective, consistent standards. So depth in the 4 areas that I just
Yeah.
mentioned. And secondly, the second audience that seems to be benefiting from these books is um, people who are either existing coaches and want to continue to build their skill set.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say a psychologist who might become even more effective in coaching if they went back and got an
Mm-hmm.
MBA,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Or vice
Yeah.
versa. Um, or someone who has some training in coaching, but probably could use additional training in both business and
Yeah.
psychology, right?
Yeah.
So you get the general idea. So, or if you're someone who is thinking about moving into
Mm-hmm.
coaching, being able to set up a plan, it doesn't have to be immediate, but a plan over several
Mm-hmm.
years of building your educational depth and your skill and experience in all 4 of those
Yeah.
areas. So my hope is that one day there will be an expectation that if you call yourself an executive coach and you really want to be operating at the top professional level
Yeah.
of the field, just like there's such a thing as a licensed
Mm-hmm.
psychologist and a boarded physician and a boarded attorney and so on and so forth, that really means something,
Mm-hmm.
Ernest,
Yeah.
as opposed to,
I love
you
the
know,
work that you're doing here and advocating for this because I think, as we talk about, we want to make sure that uh, people understand the value of psychology and psychological principles in business, but we also want to make sure that, that the services that you're getting are of quality, right, by individuals who have experience and understanding and training in it. Especially as we're talking about integrating, psychology into business, people should have an understanding of psychology, an understanding of business in order to be able to integrate that well, especially at the high level. If you're advising senior leaders, you want to make sure that the people that you're working with, know what they're talking about, really. So I really appreciate that the work that you're doing on this. Where can people get a hold of your book? Because I think that's such a great resource.
You just the website for it is very simple. It's just Pinpointing Excellence, one word, pinpointingexcellence.com. You can go to a lot of information about it, and it's available on Amazon in both digital and paperback form. I do quite a lot of speaking about it and writing. I've written some articles for Forbes and some other publications about this topic as well.
Pinpointingexcellence.com. Okay.
Pinpointingexcellence.com.
And if people want to get a hold of you, John, we'll try to get a hold of your services. How do we get a hold of you?
You could I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay.
You could also a good place to text me is just 832-215-4018, 832-215-4018.
Okay.
And email is just John at QuinnReedAssociates, all one word, .com.
Okay.
John at QuinnReedAssociates.com.
Excellent. That's fantastic. Thank you, John. Now, before we wrap up, we could talk for hours, John, because there's so much stuff to talk about here. But I want to make sure that we keep it brief for our listeners here. Before we wrap up, I always want to invite my my guests to give us a tip. We have you as the expert here. What tip would you give to the business world, in this time and age and all the things that are going on?
Oh, well, I think that if you're interested in coaching, let me just, this is a very popular one now. One of the things I offer is just a free bit of information about helping you determine whether now is a good time for you to have executive coaching or not. It's a very popular, trendy thing to do, but there's some things that you should consider and be clear about before you actually make the investment to get that kind of support. There's a good time and there's a time when it probably is not worth your while. So I try and help people differentiate those two things and confirm if they want to get executive coaching that they're in the right place to get it. And sometimes I end up encouraging people to hold off for a while. So and there's actually in the book there's an automatic download for that free piece of information.
Okay.
So
how do we get a hold of that free piece of information? So get the book and it's in there.
Get the book and it's in there.
Okay.
And if you are particularly interested in it and you don't want to get the book, shoot me an email and I'd be glad to send you that piece of information.
Awesome.
For free.
Thank you, John. That's fantastic. That's a great resource. Thank you so much for doing that. Especially, I think, because we know, sometimes it can be really easy to just follow the crowd, right? We're really thinking about, is it appropriate for me? Is this the right time for me? So I love that you're able to help us figure that out. So that's a great tip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Ernest. And it's anything we can do to help people. Really, put it another way, get the most out of their investment if and when they make that investment in coaching, so that it continues to grow in stature and in consumer confidence. That's really the thing that I would like to see happen. And there are a lot of people in our field who are right there with me, you and me together.
Yeah. So. Absolutely. I could not agree more. That's exactly what I would love to promote as well. So, John, we could talk forever, but, we have to cut it off. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We'll absolutely have to have you come back because there was so much we didn't get to that I wanted to touch on. So thanks so much for coming on, John.
Ernest, thank you so much for the work that you do in the field and for having me on. I very much appreciate it.
It was my pleasure.
Look forward to the next one.
And that's the show for today, folks. We hope to talk to you soon. Thank you.